Hey, hello, Tanya. Good to have you on. Hello, Heather. Great to have you with us. And Tamara is on. Hello, Crystal Patey. Good to have you on. Hi, Trevor Pope. Hope you're doing really good. Hope to see you again this summer, camping somewhere. Hello, Carol. Hello, Ruth and John in Grand Falls, Windsor. Hope you're doing great. Hello, Paul. I'm doing well. Hope you're doing great too. Hello, Lonnie and Dana. Hope you're doing great. Hello, Cody and Hilda. Roddy Party. Camping season has begun. Not quite started down in Newfoundland yet, Roddy. A little bit cold, I'm afraid. Hi, Carrie Wheeler. I'm having a great day indeed. Thank you for asking. Hello, Gloria and Lisa. Tony is out in Thompson. Hello, Ruth. Hello, Justin Parsons. Hope you're doing great, my friend. Hello, Aunt Florence. Hope you and Uncle Ernie are doing real well. Hi, Steve Jenkins. Hope you and Stephanie are doing great. Hi, Eileen. Cheryl, the Smith clan is on watching again. Thank you. I'm glad you are all tuned in. Hope you guys are all doing great. Out in Bay Roberts, if I'm not mistaken. Hello, Tara, and Donna, and Lorna, and Alwyn. Hope you're doing good. Keep coming in, folks. It's a good time to share this. If you know of people who are interested in the topics, by all means, feel free. Hello, Jeanette and Melissa in Grand Falls, and Beverly is on. Hello, Jeremy Sims. Hope you're doing great, my friend. I'd like to see you soon and have a chat, maybe. Be good to catch up. Hello, Hannah and Bram and Alvin. And Debbie is on in Gander. Gerald is up in Labrador. Kimberly Andrews is on. Good to have you on as always. Hello, Miriam. Great to have you on up in Toronto, all locked down, I do believe. Gloria is on in Corner Brook. Sharon is on in Kings Point. Jennifer is on. Anne is on. Annie. Rick Burton's in South Brook. Hello, Vivian. Good to have you on. Courtney O'Reilly is on. Hope you're doing great. By all means, folks, come in, say hi in the chat. Otherwise, I don't know you're on. I can't tell who's on unless you actually say hi and post a little something that I can see it. Hello, Peter and Dolores. Good to have you on. As always, just out the road. Lynn is on. Deidre is on. Hello, Deidre. Good to have you on. And Melvin is out in Birchie Bay. And Betty Lou. Hello, Jared. It was great to see you and Crystal this week. And your boys. Always good to see you. And have a chat. Yes, indeed. Miriam says they are locked down. Wade is in the valley. What a lovely spot. Wade up in the Annapolis Valley. We really, really enjoy it there. Yeah, Sherry's in Botwood. Stephanie is in Lewisport. Miriam is happy and free in her spirit. Well, see, if you live in Ontario right now, or Alberta, I suppose, happy and free in your spirit is kind of what you're aiming for, isn't it? Yeah, indeed. Hello, Russ Austin. Hugs. You get no hugs from me, Russ. You're going to have to look to Jennifer for that, or some of your more hug-friendly friends. But you know what? I'm glad to see you anyway. Kathy Palmer's on. Wanda is on. Norma is on. Hi, Norma. Hope you and Peter are doing real well. Amy is on. I don't know if my comments are delayed or people got me blocked, but I can't see half the names you're naming off. It depends on people's settings, I think. And this is public, so I really don't know how that works, to be honest. Yes, Michael Ball. Melinda got me a champion t-shirt at the Costco. Oh, yes. I am now hanging with the cool kids. At this stage in my life, Michael, I'm just looking for t-shirts that fit well. And this one happens to. So there you go. That's my criteria. Rhoda and Gerald Andrews are on. The Rideouts are on as well from Nova Scotia. The Pools are on in Dunford. Joel is in. Good to have you on, Joel. Glenda in St. John's. Ruth is up in Truro. I like Truro. Always, I got fond memories of going through Truro and visiting. Did a ministry weekend one time with some other people in Bible in Bible Hill, is it? Right outside Truro. Yeah, hi Marg in PEI. Chad, good evening, my friend. Hope you're doing real well. Hi Dwight. Hello, Enid and Lorraine. Good to have you on as well. Keep coming in, folks. Good to have everyone. Invite some friends if you know they are interested in these topics, and we'll get started shortly. This has been another... And Newfoundland has been stuck in weeks and weeks and weeks of this onshore flow where we're getting the 5 and 6 and 7 degrees and drizzle. It feels like we have had this now since late April, or not late April, early April. Every now and then the sun peeks through, but man, we have had one wicked little spell of weather here in onshore flow. I'm sure some of you, it's nicer where you are. Let's see who we got. Enid, hi Enid. Lorraine Green is up in Fort Mac. George and Shirley in Burntberry Pond. Lovely, lovely spot. Oh, Heather's from Truro. I didn't know that, Heather. You're actually a maritimer. Paul and Gail are on in Bedford. Great spot down in Bedford. They watch me on the big screen. Yes, unfortunately, at the rate I'm going, it's going to take a big screen. I'm afraid Maxine is on. My dear mother is on next door. Always good to have you on. Violet is on in St. Thomas, Ontario. Sid is on. Good to have you on, Sid. Hi, Diane in Stoneville. I understand you're getting some new pastors. Great pastors. Excellent news there for you with Rob and Ruth Ann. Hi, Nina and Hillary. Good to have you on. Yeah, Amy, some are watching under BT Knoll, and you're watching under Bradley Truman Knoll, and some are probably watching this on Facebook. Or on YouTube. I can broadcast this to all three. Linda is on. Elwyn is taking a positive view of the rain. This is true. Margot is on. Paul is in West Virginia. Rex and Nancy are on. Hope you guys are doing really, really good. Hello, Rob. Oh, I'm glad you're on, sir. Good to have you with us as well. So let's get ourselves started. You can keep coming in, invite a friend, and say hi to you. Say hi. Duncan Marge, you're on, and Beulah. Let me see. Here's where we're going tonight. We are going to start off by talking a little bit about older pastors, and our heritage really is where I want to go with this. Then I'm going to get into a section on hell and look at a variety of different ways of understanding the biblical teaching on hell. And we're going to conclude with a panel again on women in ministry. I'm calling it Women in Ministry 2. And the goal here is to take another look. I did a first panel of women who were in pastoral ministry. And then last week, I think it was, I walked through the biblical teaching on especially the 2 verses in particular that are a challenge. And tonight we have some more women who are in ministry joining us, and we're going to do another panel and hear what they've got to say. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And I'm sure you will as well. I, of course, need to wish all of the moms a happy Mother's Day, including my own, who is watching, without whom I would not be here, and my mother-in-law, Bonnie. Best mother-in-law I ever had. She's down in Triton. And I should, and along those lines, on that note, I should mention that it's fortunate today that I'm even coherent right now, because I was in Triton at the in-laws for a cooked turkey dinner. And then we came up out of that to my own mother's, where they had deep fried turkey with salads and these types of things. And the thing is, you have to ask yourself, as a good son and son-in-law, do I want to offend my mother-in-law and not eat very much? Or do I then want to offend my own mother and not eat very much at her place. And of course, the correct answer is you can't really offend either one of them as a good person. So, I ate my share at both places, not because I was in any way hungry, but just out of an abundance of politeness, because that's what I'm like. The end result is that I've had turkey twice today. And so I am just barely coherent in many ways. But having said that, maybe it'll be the best time you will have ever understood my teaching. One never knows. So, yeah, happy Mother's Day to all out there. And, to broaden it out, I saw this today as well, and I thought it was worth sharing. To expectant mothers, biological mothers, foster mothers, adoptive mothers, single mothers, stepmothers, grieving mothers, grandmothers, and especially the spiritual mothers. From my point of view, I wanted to comment on. All of you are important, whether you have adopted, whether you are grandmothering, whether you are fostering. It is all contributing to the well-being of the next generation. And, I'm particularly, when I read that, I'm thinking about being a spiritual mother. And boy, I tell you what, we can really, really use, and I know the others are very important, fostering and these types of things, but we can really, really use some spiritual mothers and fathers for the younger people in our world today. And so if you are participating in any of these, whether you're adopting, fostering, your stepmother, those who are grieving, we think of you today as well, expecting, by all means, our hats are off to you. And I wanted to say thank you for what you do. Okay, one other thing before I get going here. Interesting piece. I know some of you are following this on Bill C-10 in Canada. This is a very, I want to say interesting, but also very troubling piece of legislation. It's the Trudeau government's attempt to crack down on hate speech and this type of thing on the internet. The challenge is they had a clause in there that specifically excluded user-generated content. So that would be things like I'm doing right now. But in the latest reading, and as it went through the Liberal-controlled committee, they've actually removed that clause. And that, of course, is troubling because now they are intending to police, it looks like, even user-generated content. And when you get an organization like the Globe and Mail challenging the government's motives, and so the headline there, as I'm sure you can read, the Trudeau government says it won't regulate user content on social media. Bill C-10 says otherwise. That is not, that's very troubling. Like, I think that's something that Christians are going to have to speak up about on a variety of fronts. And maybe I'll talk about this in another show. There's so much, it's really censorship now, and it comes out of a cancel culture and all of this type of stuff. And the motives behind some of it is admirable in the sense that we certainly don't want speech that is patently hate speech. We recognize that there are limitations on our freedom of speech in this country, and they recognize the same thing in the US. But boy, the freedom of speech, the freedom to express yourself is really a cornerstone of a democracy. And you only limit it when absolutely, absolutely necessary. And you don't just want to be policing it for views that you find difficult or uncomfortable. And I'm afraid, and the Globe is pointing out, that's where it seems to be trending. So, yeah, you're going to really want to pay attention to that one for sure. Dwight says, every news media source I've seen left and right are blasting Bill C-10. Yeah, it's not popular. And it really seems like government overreach. And so that is going to be something that we're going to want to watch. Okay, keep coming on. Good to have you all on. I'm going to start off with a little chat about something I'm calling In Praise of Older Pastors. And where this comes from is the idea, and I've been actually, to be transparent with you, I've been struggling with this some now for about 20 years. What happens is when you're involved in any organization, particularly a denomination, for example, and you challenge past practice, or you say, this was not right, or you say we believe things inaccurately in the past and this is a better way to look at it, which incidentally is kind of the calling of a teacher. You want to teach the word, you want to teach doctrine and theology, and you want to arrive at the truth. And so when you survey the history, you see some things that don't match, to the best of your understanding, the best ways of dealing with these scriptures. Then you're going to want to say, folks, there is a better way to look at this, or there is another way to look at this, or we should consider some other ways, which I've done now for about 20 years in my current location. And almost invariably, somebody will say, well, this is awful offensive to our older pastors, or somebody will, make a snarky comment to the effect that, well, I guess everything we believed was wrong, or did they do nothing right? And these types of extreme responses. And I guess what I wanted to say is, just because we point out ways in which we could have been a little more accurate scripturally, or ways in which our understanding or our language that we used was probably not the sharpest, doesn't mean you're trashing everything your founders did. You have to be able to look at your past and look at your history with a careful eye and a critical eye. And that doesn't mean negative there. That means with an appraising eye, to see if we have believed the best and most accurate version of biblical truth. So, a very straightforward example, and one that gets a lot of press lately, is the idea that we talked about going to church and we welcomed people to church, and we made a lot of the building, and, kids weren't permitted to do things in church. We couldn't have a lunch together in church. And all of that, of course, is not biblical language, because since Pentecost, we are the church, and we go to a building that we have commissioned for the purpose of worshiping God and reaching our communities. And we go there to worship together, to get ourselves in out of the rain and the snow and the elements, and to have a place where we can gather and to also serve the community from. But, we've never always had a good perspective on that. And that little slip of the tongue, welcome to church, or isn't it good to be here in church? And these types of things. The problem is then we lose sight of the fact that we are the church, and the way the community gets reached is that the church is going into the community and reaching people for Jesus, and then bringing those folks back to the corporate gathering every Sunday. And so I correct some of that stuff from time to time, and then I get the pushback that you obviously don't value the past, or they were all wrong and this stuff. And of course, that's patently untrue. They got us here. And I wanted to say publicly that you can correct or fine-tune points of teaching or understanding without trashing the whole lot of what they did. I mean, many of our founders had more courage and determination and faith in God than I'll ever have. That's a fact. You can read their stories, and these are people who sacrificed tremendously. And I can acknowledge that, and I do, because I know our history, without saying everything they ever taught was wonderful. Because the fact is, none of them claim to be infallible. And I think they would be shocked to think that we would insist that we held to their teaching 75 years ago. Never mind the fact that when people say to me, why can't we just believe what we always believed? The challenge with that is that we haven't always believed the same thing. If you take the denomination I'm a part of, for example, And Pentecostals across the country were officially pacifists. That is, they didn't believe in war. They didn't believe in fighting in war. Many of them never believed in serving in the RCMP. And they were pacifists right up until mysteriously Hitler started marching across Europe. And then in the late 40s, pacifism language disappears from Pentecostalism. So, okay. So in my own denomination, in my particular context, these early Pentecostals believed in entire sanctification. That is, they believed there was a moment at which, in a second blessing, the Holy Spirit came and cleansed you from sin. And upon awareness of this heart cleansing, you were then admitted to the baptism in the Holy Spirit with the evidence of speaking in tongues as a third blessing. And we believed in the three stages: salvation, sanctification, and Spirit baptism for decades after the founding of the denomination. And eventually the second and third stages were blended together, and sanctification became understood as something that was instantaneous at the moment of salvation, but also progressive as you go through your life. So there's another example. The denomination I'm a part of would not ordain the woman that founded us until the mid-'80s. So they moved on that. They recognized them. They called them lady workers, any number of things, but did not actually ordain women until the 80s. And then, of course, the example I love to point out, much to some people's chagrin, in 1927, the denomination I'm with actually made a motion in General Conference to say, be it resolved that the Pentecostal assemblies stand on record as being against picnics because they were worldly. Well, as you may know, in the decades since, thankfully, we have come to believe that picnics are now okay for the believer, and we changed our mind on that. And see, denominations are evolving like denominations should, because no one generation has everything locked down. Now, is there a danger that somebody like myself comes along with a head poked full of useless knowledge and drags people into error? Yeah, that's always a danger. But remaining static is not an option, see, folks. You can't stay with, the version of Pentecostalism, for example, that you have stuck in your head. For one thing, you're going to have to pick the version. Do you want the 1915 version of the Pentecostal assemblies? Do you want the 1935 version, the 1965 version? Because by 1965, they had realized the 1935 version had gotten some things wrong. If you don't want the 65 version, do you want the 85 version? Because they're not all the same. The idea of going back to this one solid place, this is what we believed, that's a myth. It doesn't exist. I would argue that the essence of true Pentecostalism, if that's what you're interested in, if that's your thing, is found in the first 10 years of the movement after Azusa. So that's worth reading on. So, nothing stays static, and we owe it to ourselves and those that follow us to see how accurate we can be. And that will involve some change, and it will involve some risk. However, I think it's useful. And if you're called to do what I do, then that's what, you kind of have to point that stuff out. Okay, let me see who is on here. Rose is on, Keith is on, Cal. Miriam says, we can't know where we're going if we don't understand accurately where we've come from. History should be a point of reference, not a place of residence. That's good, Miriam. I would say this to you. Many times we have a version of the church that we have in mind. And so we say, we idolize a certain. So in Newfoundland, lots of times I hear folks, they seem to idolize a 1950s, 1960s version of Pentecostalism that was always in revival. And that's what they think real Pentecostalism is. But if you're in a denomination, I encourage you to go right back to the roots, because by 1950s and 1960s in Newfoundland, heavy amounts of legalism had already crept in. We were already being influenced by fundamentalism. We were being influenced by the National Association of Evangelicals, which we all joined in 1949. And so don't just pick a little spot in our history and say, this is who we are. You really need to go back to the essence of something like this. And I would encourage you to do that. Donna says, I don't find it offensive at all to our founders to question things. My grandparents, Frank and Hazel Bursey, oh yeah, they were in Botwood for quite a while. They were the grassroots of the Pentecostal movement. This is true. They may have not gotten everything completely correct, but it was genuine and all for the kingdom. Exactly. And I don't think were you able to interview them today, they would claim to have everything correct. And neither do I. My students, as I'm fond of saying, are already starting to correct me on things. That's how stuff goes. But we can stay committed to a basic framework of orthodoxy, even while we explore interesting ideas. And along the lines of exploring interesting ideas, I'm sure some of you who watched Dr. Ord last week had a little bit of either your mind was a little bit blown, or you felt confused maybe, or you just believed it was outright heresy. And part of the reason I invite on a guest like Tom is because it causes us to think. There's a guy who is well-trained. He's trained in philosophy and theology, and he keeps running into these people who cannot believe in a God who allows so much evil to happen. And he says to himself, there's got to be a way to explain this that's biblically faithful. And he offers a proposal, and I read it and I go, that's an interesting proposal. I think it's worth thinking about. And I have, and I've thought about it now for some years, from the first time I read his first book. And he was kind enough to come on and share with us very humbly his proposal, and I hope it's helped you to think about it ever since. Amy says, people as individuals grow as they age. Shouldn't groups and organizations grow in the same way? Yes, they should. The challenge for organizations is staying current and fresh and connecting with younger generations and not solidifying. That's a challenge. Our early leaders had a few facts on fire, James says, but by now we have had more than a few facts along with the fire. Yeah, we'd better have a few more facts. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Dwight says, my grandfather was one of those older pastors. His faith was far stronger. Yep. So, there is a lot of that. And yeah, let's see what else we got here. Joel says, a little bit of nostalgia can make us feel good, but a constant nostalgic desire for the past is deadly. Yep, I believe that. This always longing back to simpler times. We're not going back. From my reading of Canada, as you know, we're in for some interesting and rough times going ahead. Okay, appreciate you listening to me on that. I've wanted to talk about that for a little while. My heart is really not trashing our history or our elders, but where things can be seen a little more clearly and some misconceptions corrected, then that is what we need to do if we claim to love the truth. And now I'm going to transition and talk a little bit about hell, which has been requested a couple of times, actually. So I entitled this one, What the Hell? I would commend to you this book, which is called 4 Views on Hell. And it's part of the Counterpoint series, and you can get this on Amazon. Gundry and Sprinkle are the editors of this. And, hell is still a popular topic. You'll get things like this show up all the time on my Facebook feed. We need preachers who preach that hell is still hot, heaven is still real, sin is still wrong, the Bible is God's word, and Jesus is the only way to salvation. And so, quite apparently, folks are tying the belief in a literal hell to your belief in the truth of the scriptures. And this is what happens for many folks on an issue like this. You have the traditional view And then anyone who doesn't believe in the traditional view, they obviously don't believe in the Bible. They are not biblically based Christians and may even be considered heretics. So that's certainly one of the things happens on a discussion like this. A little bit of background for you. I'll make this bigger since I'm going to do a little bit of teaching through 5 views. The primary, let me change my banner here. I missed my first one. Actually, I'll turn this off for a minute here. Primary Greek word for hell is Gehenna, which is used about 12 times in the New Testament. It comes from Old Testament prophetic passages that talk about God's judgment of the wicked in the valley of Hinnom. And the Hebrew there is Gehinnom or Gehenna. And you can see the scriptures there in Jeremiah. And the valley of Hinnom, as you may know, is where Ahab and Manasseh burned human sacrifices to the evil god Molech. Gehenna is a real location, by the way, outside the city gates where garbage was burned. You may or may not know that. And of course, the fire never went out. And if you've ever been to a dump, you'll know that's the case. The fire never ever goes out. And it's also a place where lepers gathered and the outcast gathered. And hence you had a lot of weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth out here where the fire never went out. There's also another word, the Greek word Hades, which means the abode of the dead, is used 9 times in the New Testament. And Tartu, which literally means in the Greek, throw down to Tartarus, which is a deep abyss of torment and suffering in Greek mythology. That's found only once in 2 Peter 2:4. And some of you are going to be interested in that because Peter uses a very different word for the place where God kept the angels who rebelled. And he pulls a word right out of Greek mythology in 2 Peter. So some of you are going to want to study that. But I will say that Jesus and the New Testament writers adopted both the words and the hellish images. So the Bible talks about everlasting fire, talks about weeping, death, destruction, outer darkness, and a lake of fire. And I do believe that all New Testament writers believe that hell was a terrible place of punishment for unbelievers. And that seems fairly apparent. So tonight I want to talk about 5 prominent views of hell. And one of them for sure you're going to recognize, and then I'm going to walk you through other ways to look at this topic. So we have, of course, the traditional view. And this is the one most of you would be familiar with. Hell is a place of endless, conscious punishment for sin. This punishment is interpreted literally. It is physical torment. And I don't know if we can even fathom it when we talk about hell. Because we sing a song like, when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun. And that verse of Amazing Grace goes on to say, we will have only just begun to praise God in 10,000 years. Well, you know, the soul that's suffering and being tormented in hell after 10,000 years in the traditional view has also only just begun. I don't know if most people who hold to the traditional view ever stop and wrap their minds around the fact that eternity is a long time. And the reason we don't is we tend to think of heaven. Well, time will just go on and on and on. We're going to be in God's presence. It's going to be glorious. But if you believe in the traditional literal hell and literal physical torment, that too goes on for eternity. And so this is a topic that we teach on and we believe. But if you're going to hold to the traditional view in particular, it really needs to come with tremendous sobriety. And I'm not sure we give it that kind of sober recognition. I will say to you that from my vantage point, the traditional view does seem to have the weight of at least the plainest reading of Scripture behind it, which is no doubt why it's the traditional view. Matthew 25:41, Jesus will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. Matthew 18, Jesus talks about if your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, better to cut it off and throw away, because it's better to enter life with one eye than two eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell. So these are Jesus' words. Matthew 8, the subjects of the earthly kingdom will be thrown outside. He's talking about those who have not believed, into the darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. And of course, remember now too, when they're using the word Gehenna here, you literally have a garbage dump where the fire never goes out, and there is much weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth. So folks can connect here. Jesus here in Matthew 9, or in Mark 9, in the same bit of scripture talking about, if your eye causes you to stumble, he says, better to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than to have two eyes and be thrown into hell, where the worms that eat them do not die and the fire is not quenched. And there he's quoting Isaiah 66. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. He says, everyone will be salted with fire. Matthew 14, he's talking about the angels at the end of time are going to gather the weeds, as it were. They're going to be thrown into the fiery furnace where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then I will read this passage to you. This is the passage from Revelation 20. The devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet have been thrown. They're going to be tormented day and night forever and ever. Then I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it, and he saw the dead, and books were opened, which is the book of their deeds. And then also a book is opened, which is the book of life. Death and hell are thrown into the lake of fire. So you can think of both death being defeated and hell, which is like the city jail, compared to the lake of fire, which is like the federal penitentiary. Death and hell are also both thrown into the lake of fire. In verse 14, verse 15, anyone whose name is not found in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. And of course, there's lots of fire imagery there. There's lots of eternal language. And Jesus speaks about it very plainly, and this is from whence we get the traditional view. Now, of course, as you can imagine, that is no longer the only view. There's another way to look at this, which is the traditional view, but they view it metaphorically. In other words, when hell is a place of endless conscious punishment for sin, but it may be viewed most accurately as a singular separation from the loving presence of God. And so I've used a picture there to symbolize that really. This punishment is interpreted not literally, as in physical torment, but metaphorically, a state of being, of spiritual suffering, and separation from God. And so proponents of this view that believe there is eternal separation from God, but they don't believe that it's actual fire, and that they are being aggressively and actively tormented for eternity. They view this as a separation from the presence of God for eternity. They'll tell us, of course, that biblical writers, including Jesus, often use hyperbole or exaggeration to make a point. Jesus used it when he said, if you don't hate your father and your mother, you can't follow me. He's exaggerating there to make a point about commitment. When Jesus says you better off pluck out your eye if it causes you to sin, Jesus certainly never intended that we go around plucking out our eyes or cutting off our hands. He's using hyperbole there to make a point. And so folks who believe in the metaphorical view of hell would say the use of fire in conjunction with hell is understood to be a very convenient image that portrayed the intensity of the burning wrath of God. And when, of course, Jesus used a Gehenna, they would have readily understood this terrible, smelly, awful place of pain and heat and judgment. So he picked up an imagery that represents the intensity of the wrath of God. Proponents of this view would also say that, the Bible uses imagery in things like heaven. And I've talked about this some before. Are the streets of heaven really paved with gold? Or did the writer just say, what is more precious than anything you can imagine? Is every gate really made from a single pearl? Or is John just trying to say this is beyond your comprehension? And if there's metaphorical language used for heaven, it might also be used for hell. And then, of course, proponents of this view would say the two most prominent descriptions, and maybe you've not thought of this before, for hell are fire and everlasting darkness, or utter darkness. And at least one of these must be symbolic, you would think, because you can't have eternal fire and pitch blackness at the same time. Because where there's fire, there's light. And so, but the Bible does use these terms back and forth, fire and utter darkness. And so proponents of a metaphorical view would say that one of these is symbolic for sure. And so maybe the whole picture of the flames is symbolism there. And then there's annihilationism, which is the idea that you are indeed punished for your sin. You're judged and you're punished for your sin. But a loving God doesn't actively punish you and torment you for eternity. This is not consistent with the character of God revealed for us in Jesus Christ. So some Christians over the centuries have taught that God ultimately destroys the unrepentant. Their suffering does not last eternally. Jesus made reference to this possibly when he said, "Don't be afraid of the one who can kill the body, but be afraid of the one who can destroy both the body and soul in hell." And these folks, the annihilation folks, and this is an increasingly popular view, I should tell you, they'll say, that Isaiah passage, when it talks about the worms that eat them that do not die and the fire is not quenched, this is referring to corpses. That Isaiah, if you read Isaiah 66, these are not folks who are living and the fire is constantly burning them and the worms are constantly eating them. They're corpses. They're already gone. And the idea that the worm doesn't die is rather referring to the fact that God's judgment can't be prevented or reversed. It is going forward. And that's actually, from my perspective, worth thinking about, in the sense that when Jesus does quote the fact that the worm will not die and the fire does not go out, the Isaiah passage that he is quoting there is referring to folks who have already died. They are not consciously, eternally being tormented. And then the annihilation folks will use some more verses, such as 2 Peter 2:6. God condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah by burning them to ashes. He destroyed them, making them an example of what's going to happen to the ungodly. So the citizens of Sodom and Gomorrah are not tormented eternally. They're destroyed. Jesus says in Matthew 25, he's telling a parable here, and he says to those on his left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life." And the annihilation folks will say eternal punishment, yes, but not eternal punishing. The effect of the punishment lasts forever, but the punishing does not. It's kind of like they will say, consider the phrase, "we are eternally redeemed," or eternal redemption. We are not being redeemed constantly through eternity. We have been redeemed, and the effects of our redemption now last forever. And the annihilation folks would say the same thing. The effects of the judgment of God upon the unrepentant last forever. They are eternally judged, but they are not eternally being punished. The punishment has eternal effects. The punishing doesn't go on and on forever. And then verse in 2 Thessalonians 1:6, and this is, Paul reminding the church here that God is just. He says, he will pay back trouble to those who trouble you, and will give relief to you who are troubled, and to us as well. This will happen, and here he's talking about the day of the Lord in the end. This will happen when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven in blazing fire with his powerful angels. That's Revelation 19, the second coming. He will punish those who don't know God and do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus. They will be punished with what? They will be punished with everlasting destruction. And shut out from the presence of the Lord. So he combines two pictures there, one of destroying them and the other of being shut out from the presence of God. And then other people note that, in fact, only the souls of believers are immortal. And some of you will wish to study this, that, I've actually taught myself that everybody listening tonight will be alive in some form in 1,000,000 years. But there are folks, particularly of this school, who will say, not so fast. The only eternal life is only promised to those who believe in Jesus Christ. We all don't have an immortal soul. You gain an immortal soul through the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. And because you believed on Jesus, now you're alive for eternity. And I've listed the passages there. Let me move this out of the way for you, if I can find it. 2 Timothy 2:10, 1 Corinthians 15, 53 to 55. Living forever is directly tied to believing in Jesus. So that's the annihilation idea. They still believe in punishment, and they believe the effects of the punishment are eternal, but they don't believe that the punishing goes on forever. I'm going to stop now. You guys are about 20 seconds delayed. If you have a question, by all means, send it in. Before I move on to the next topic, Pam Pinkson, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish. Yeah, there's an interesting take there on John 3:16. Thanks for that, Pam. James Lander, those who hold to annihilation tend to use the term conditional immortality. That's right. In other words, immortality, the eternal soul, is only promised to believers. Those who do not believe will not have eternal souls and therefore cannot endure eternal conscious torment. Thanks for that, James. Indeed. Let me see here. Joel, hey, Doc, do you think that humanity or life given to humanity away from God and his spirit is eternal? How does this impact our views on an eternal place separated from God? Well, this is the whole point, Joel. Good question about conditional immortality. If you have to believe in Jesus, and this is what James is pointing out here as well, if you have to believe in Jesus to have eternal life, then those who don't believe in Jesus are sentenced and punished. And as the Bible says, the wages of sin is death. And so the annihilation folks would say you don't have eternal life, and therefore you cannot be punished eternally if you've not believed in Jesus. And so that's certainly worth thinking about as well. A couple of more here, and then I'm going to bring the panel on. Then we get the idea of universalism, and this is the idea that in the end, really, everyone is saved. And they rely somewhat on verses like Romans 5:18. Consequently, just as one trespass resulted in condemnation for all people, so also one righteous act resulted in justification and life for all people. And they would say that the death of Jesus is so powerful, his blood so mighty, that it is eventually able to overcome and reverse human unbelief. And C.S. Lewis, there's a famous quote from Lewis that says, the gates of hell are locked from the inside. Lewis believed that the only people who existed in hell at the end are those who are absolutely so stubborn and so rebellious and so set on their ways that even though the love and the grace of God was revealed to them, even in hell, they simply refused to bow the knee. They simply refused, even in hell, to accept the love and grace of God that was offered. And so he said the gates of hell are locked from the inside. And that is, in a sense, a form of universalism, in the sense that even in hell, God's love is shed abroad. Now, some folks actually take universalism quite to the logical conclusion, which is to say that God's grace is ultimately irresistible and everybody is saved in the end. They use verses like Revelation 15 that says all nations will come and worship before you, and Revelation 21, which says the nations will walk by the light of the Lamb. And interestingly, in Revelation, nations tend to refer to the secular entities that have rejected God. And yet Revelation shows them coming and worshiping. So the Universalist folks, some of them will use scriptures like this. And then a little bit here on purgatory. And this only because this is connected to a view of hell for sure. The Roman Catholic Church holds that all who die in God's grace and friendship, but are still imperfectly purified, undergo the process of purification, which the church calls purgatory, so that they can achieve the holiness necessary to enter the joy of heaven. And this kind of concept is alluded to in one of the deuterocanonical books, or the Apocrypha, we call it, which is a collection of books that the Roman Catholic Church has in their canon of Scripture, and the Protestant Church has never accepted. And the first verse here is from 2 Maccabees. It is therefore a holy and wholesome thought to pray for the dead, that they may be loosed from their sins. And some of you would be familiar with that practice of praying for the dead. Interestingly, Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 actually references something like this. He says, if there is no resurrection, what will those do who are baptized for the dead? Apparently that was a practice. If the dead are not raised at all, why are people baptized for them? So that's a little glimpse there into baptism for the dead. Popes John Paul II and Benedict XVI have declared that the term purgatory does not exist, does not indicate a place actually, but a condition of existence. And they would say that purgatorial fire is purifying, not punitive like hellfire. So the idea of being in purgatory is that you are being further cleansed in a sanctification sense. You are being cleansed of sins. You are achieving greater sanctification. You are not being punished in the sense of hellfire. It's a cleansing that allows you to more immediately enter into the presence of God. And they also use a verse like we see in 1 Corinthians 3:11. No one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. If anyone builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, their work is going to be shown for what it is. Because the day, that is the day of the Lord at the end, will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's work. If what's been built survives, the builder will receive a reward, heaven. If it is burned up, the builder will suffer loss, yet will be saved, even though as one escaping through the flames. So this is also a verse used to support purgatory. And one more. Protestants, therefore, who believe in purgatory, and there are some, tend to do so in terms of sanctification, not in terms of satisfaction. And by that I mean, whereas the sanctification model is about moral and spiritual transformation, the satisfaction model is about exacting punishment to pay a debt of justice. So the Protestants who believe in purgatory believe it is about becoming more holy, not paying another debt to God for your sins. And it's the latter definition of satisfaction that the reformers in the 16th century decisively rejected, because they believed it to be a denial of Christ's work on the cross. And so if you have followed this far, we have looked at 5 views of hell. You have the traditional view, which is really, in a very difficult sense, seems to carry the most biblical weight, which is why it's the traditional view. But it by far must be for us the most absolutely sobering and difficult position to hold. And then you have the metaphorical view, which I covered, annihilation, which is the idea that souls cease to exist after they're punished. Universalism, which is everybody will be saved. And then we have also covered purgatory. And so just a little teaching there for you on the 5 views of hell. Lauren, how you doing, Lauren? Hope you and Kathy are doing real well. The parable of the talents were the 2 here, well done, but the 3rd buried his. Jesus instructed they be taken to the place of wailing and gnashing of teeth, which what you are saying is the dump where the fire never dies, rather than what most considers hell. Yeah, weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth is Gehenna, which was the garbage dump outside the city in the Valley of Hinnom, as I understand it. So, yeah, that would make more sense there, wouldn't it, Lauren, for sure? Let me see. Any questions coming in? How does that old chorus play into this? Every knee shall bow, every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Yeah, Revelation gives that picture, Taylor, that at the end, everybody is going to acknowledge Christ. Some willingly on this side and some not so willingly on that side. But I'll leave that to you, and I'm sure you'll be good at this, to figure out in which sense, the traditional sense, the metaphorical sense, annihilation or universalism, for example, that might best fit into. If everybody is forced at the end to acknowledge Jesus as Lord, what does that tell us about hell ultimately? It's a very good question. Wayne is asking, what are your thoughts on the account of Lazarus? Thanks for making me aware. Luke 16. The great gulf fixed between them. Yeah. What's interesting about that, the story of the rich man and Lazarus, is the Bible doesn't present that as a parable. Some of you will know Jesus is telling parables, and then in the middle of that, he says there was a rich man. And he describes it like it's an actual story. I'd need a more specific question there, Wayne, on that. What are your thoughts? It's a profound story that I don't really have time to unpack fully now. If you have a specific question, like Dwight, what about the story of the man in hell who wanted a drop of water on his tongue? Yeah, and that obviously there, Dwight would go to the traditional view. No doubt about that. So, yep. Elwyn, several had visions of God allowing them to see hell. Did they physically see hell? I really can't answer that. They have had visions for sure. Cody says, I've really struggled to comprehend and reconcile that a God who is light and in him is no darkness would allow such eternal suffering and pain. And I would say, Cody, you are not alone there. The idea that, a loving God could actively, intentionally, not just punish people, but eternally torment them forever is really hard to wrap our minds around. Now, if you're in certain wings of the church, the Reformed wing and others, they really emphasize God's justice as a part of his character, and they really don't have a whole lot of issue with this. God is just, and God's justice is demonstrated by eternally punishing those who don't believe. Others, of course, have far more trouble with that, and this is really where the debate goes. Can you believe in a God who is described as love, who would not just punish or not just separate folks? Because I've often taught that God is not just gleefully sending people off to hell, but rather what happens is, however you understand hell, you are offered a choice on this earth to accept Christ or not. And many folks are going to reject Christ, and they're going to say, I can do it, like Frank Sinatra, my way. And when they stand before God, and the interesting thing about that Revelation 20 passage is it says, and books were opened, and the book was opened, which is the book of life. And I believe the books are the records of their deeds. Because if you want to do it your way, then you have to live according to your works. You have to live according to the things you've done. Now, the Bible tells us that, none of our works, by the works of the flesh, none shall be saved. We cannot be saved through our own efforts. Our works are all like dirty rags in terms of righteousness. But there are those who are going to stand before God and say, I wanted to do it my way. I didn't want to accept your free gift. I didn't buy all this faith talk. And God is going to say, okay, you wanted to be separated from me on the earth. You wanted nothing to do with me on the earth. The challenge with that position is that is what happens to you for eternity. And they are then eternally separated from God. And as I've understood God sending people to hell, what God is doing there is confirming their free will choice that they want nothing to do with God. And for eternity, God gives them that choice. He so honors their free will that for eternity they will get what they wanted, which is nothing to do with God. Now, is that in terms of annihilation, or is that in terms of a metaphysical entire separation from the love and the grace of God? Or is that eternal, conscious, burning torment? Folks obviously have different positions on that, but I don't think God is gleefully sending people off to hell. I think he's confirming their choice. You don't want me, you want nothing to do with me, you will surely not have anything to do with me. It's kind of like the hardening of the heart in the Bible. You persist and you want to go this direction, I will make sure you get going in that direction. It's what he did to Pharaoh in Exodus 4. You insist 5 times, the Bible says Pharaoh hardened his heart, and then 5 times it says, and God hardened Pharaoh's heart. God says, you're going to get what you want. And what you want is the punishment. And so that's kind of how I understand this, God sending people to hell. Let's see, Dave, is true justice even for a lifetime of sin eternal punishment? I can see why many struggle with this viewpoint. Yeah, like if you sin, even if you sin really well for 80 or 85 years, punishing you for eternity, like we can't even comprehend eternity, seems like a bit of an overplay on God's part. Even if you consider God just, is it justice to punish somebody for eternity for 85 years of riotous and worldly living? When I think about some of the atrocities happening to innocent children in this world, it's easy for me to see how God would send people to hell. Yep, I can understand that as well, Janice. Thank you for that, Joel. Yep. Okay. Okay, good. So anyway, you can feel free to chew on that a little more. Those are 5 different viewpoints on hell. And I hope you found that useful. Now, we are now going to transition. And this is a strange transition to go from hell to talking about women in ministry. And it is certainly not intentional. But here we are. We are looking at the second part of this. And with this, I'll conclude the conversation on it. And I have 4 guests coming on who are going to chat to us some about women in ministry. And they are Rebecca and Kirsty and Kayla and Christy. Turn on your mics, folks, and say hi.
Hello.
How's everyone?
Hey. Good.
Lauren says that's a hell of a transition. Yes, Lauren, that is indeed a hell of a transition.
Nice.
But I had an option, and the other option was to go on from talking about old pastors into the women on the screen. I didn't think they want that any better, so
no.
We're just going to move from hell. Thank you, folks, for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure.
So, all of you, why don't you start off by introducing yourselves just briefly? See, folks, all of these women are in ministry, and none of these women are in pastoral ministry right now. And they all have familiarity with it. Some of them have had credentials. Some of them have been involved in pastoral ministry and now are not. And so I wanted to take some time to talk about women in ministry who are not necessarily in pulpit ministry. And I'm going to have these 4 women chat for a little bit. And then I have 4 more who are going to come and join them as well for kind of a broader panel in a few minutes. So, folks, starting with Rebecca, why don't you just tell us who you are and what you're doing, how you're serving right now?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Rebecca Grimes. Currently, I am working for a nonprofit organization called Teen Challenge Canada. We have a center here in St. John's called the Atlantic Hope Women's Center. So that's where I'm stationed currently. Actually, right now this year, I'm on maternity leave. So I'm actually not there right now. I have a newborn baby, which is a whole nother version of ministry in and of itself. So I like to think I'm still in active ministry. It just looks a little bit different these days. And I also have the joy of partnering with my husband, who he himself is in pastoral ministry. So I like to think that I am in pastoral ministry, but just not getting paid for it.
Like so many.
Right. Yeah. Here we are.
Kirsty.
My name is Kirsty Collins, and I'm currently working with provincial government right now, and I have been for the last number of years, nonprofit before that, community before that, the school system. So I've held some various roles. I'm a mom of 3, 11-year-old, 13-year-old, and an 18-year-old. And I'm the wife of the husband Dave, who cooks wonderful food. And you hear often from Brad on the show.
Yes, amen. And I enjoyed that wonderful food last night, actually.
Yes, we did.
Kirsty and then Kirsty.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. So I'm Kirsty Doms, and I'm from the Ottawa Valley in Ontario. And I've come from many, many years of ministry in the local church, at different churches within the Valley region. And currently, my day job is a psychotherapist, registered psychotherapist at a community health center. But I also have a women and teen ministry called True You, School of Relationship. And we talk about mental health. We talk about relationships and identity, all things wellness. And I also have a little side thing where I help pastors and leaders with their mental health, especially if they're going through a rough time, rough transition, if they've encountered some abusive power. That's some things I help people journey through and walk through and gain some healing. And Jeff, my husband, Jeff, and I, he's been in ministry, pastoral ministry as well. We're married 17 years this year, and 10 of those years have been at one of our local Pentecostal camps. And so we live at camp, and we help take care of the property. And so at camp, you just can see me painting and cleaning and cutting lawns. So that's what I'm up to.
Awesome. And Kayla.
I am Kayla Joy, originally, of course, from The Rock, and currently living in Edmonton, Alberta, where I am I'm a middle school teacher here. I actually teach with Parkland School Division, which is just west of Edmonton. So I've been in that role now for 3 years, and a year and a half of which has been in pandemic teaching. So that's been a whole other story, but here nonetheless. So I'm full-time with Parkland. I teach 5 and 6 language arts and social studies, a little bit of music here and there. And I come from pastoral ministry as well, some district ministry, and I've been kind of in teaching and kind of back and forth, and just seen God kind of bring those two worlds together on multiple occasions. So what's interesting about my current position is that I teach in a public school, but in a Christian program. So those of you who are listening who are from Newfoundland might not be familiar with this model, but basically it's sort of like how a French immersion stream would be housed in an English school. So I teach in a regular public school, but it's a Christian stream, which is really, really cool because I actually get to disciple kids openly as a Christian teacher in my classes, those who are in that program, but they are in a regular public school surrounded by people all the time, including teachers who don't believe like they do. So it's just real time in your face discipleship and looking at curriculum through a Christian worldview. So just seeing my two worlds kind of collide a little.
So what would you want people to know about women in ministry from your perspective and your context? Who wants to start us off with that question? What do you wish people knew?
So many things. I can start.
Yeah, start off.
Sure. Maybe I'll ease us in a little bit because I feel like I want to start with something that might be obvious or a little bit obvious to some people, but it's maybe not necessarily something that I feel like we do well all the time, and that is that the banner Women in Ministry is not a one-size-fits-all type of banner. So I mean, like I said, it seems really obvious to say it out loud, but I think it's just a really good reminder for all of us that I think sometimes the most comfortable thing is the thing that we've seen before or something that's been done before for a really long time. And so for me personally, like I ran in the opposite direction of ministry for a really long time. I always felt like I was called to ministry, not necessarily pastoral ministry. I knew that that wasn't for me, but I always felt like I was called to some sort of ministry. But I ran in the opposite direction of that because I never really felt like I fit the mold, I guess, or what I had seen, what I had always seen. I never really knew how my gifts and abilities would kind of mesh with ministry, what that would look like. And I forget who it was on your last stream with the women's panel, and they said like representation matters. And it's so true. It is so important. It's really difficult, I think, a lot of the times to be what you can't see. And like for me as a young person coming up through high school, through university, there weren't a lot of women in ministry in my life that I could look at and say like, oh, I see myself in that person, or I see like the gifts that I have, or the abilities that I feel like skills that God has given me, kind of fleshed out in a ministry position. Like there weren't a lot of people that I could look to and see that. So yeah, for me, I was just like, I don't belong. I don't fit. I don't know where I would fit in this context. And so I kind of tried to go the opposite direction for a long time until I came to the conclusion that I just didn't care what people thought anymore. And I was just like, you know what, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to make it work. And who knows, maybe if there had been, more women in my life that I could have looked at and said like, oh, hey, like I can see myself in you. Maybe I would have stopped running a little bit sooner. I don't know. Who knows? But I just want to share like a really quick anecdote to kind of go along with my point that it's not a one size fits all type of banner. Like I said, my husband's in pastoral ministry. And so we were actually at a church that he was pastoring at. It was our first Sunday there. So we were meeting all of these new people, and a really lovely lady came up to me. It was the first time that I had met her that Sunday. And so we had a great conversation about her kids and all that kind of stuff. And so before we ended the conversation, she looked at me and she said, so when are you starting a women's Bible study? And I think I literally laughed like that. And anyone that's watching that knows me is probably laughing as well, because it's such a valid question. It was a really innocent question. It came from such a good place in her heart. But if she knew me, which she didn't at the time, if she knew me and kind of the gifts and the abilities that I feel like I've been given, she would have known really quickly that that's just not something that I ever would feel like match my skill set, I guess, or something that I really feel like I would be called to do. And like I said, it came from such a good place, and, we got to know each other. I think I answered her something. I was like, I actually won't be doing that. But if you feel like that's a gap that needs to be filled, I support you 100%. So anyways, it's just a really quick, funny anecdote. And like I said, it came from a good place, but it just goes to show you that that's what she knew of a pastor's wife, of a woman in, ministry in that way. Like that's what she had always seen. And that was an expectation in her mind that had been placed on me now coming in as her pastor's wife. Right. Yeah. And actually it's funny, the more I think about it and I'm saying it out loud, the most pushback I think personally that I've had, and maybe the most, the people that have expressed the most discomfort, I think, have actually been other women. It's not men at all. It's other women. And so that's a good reminder, even as I'm saying that out loud, even to myself, I'm speaking to myself as well. Like as women, I think it's really easy to be more critical of other women. And so it's a good reminder for all of us that we need to be better at always intentionally, like, championing and celebrating other women, and not just women that look like us or that sound like us or that dress like us or that, have the same opinions as us. But it's just women, diverse in nature, like all kinds of women. We need to be better. So that's a good reminder for all of us. So yeah, I think what I would say is it's not one size fits all. It's okay to be different. And if you're listening to those two things and you're hearing me say that and you feel a little bit like, oh, that's a little bit uncomfortable, I don't know, maybe my challenge for you is man, I think the one thing that the past couple of years have taught me when it comes to gender equality and, racial injustice and all those things is that like it's so important to take a step back and take a really hard, long, introspective look inside and figure out, like where that discomfort comes from and the root of, our biases and stuff like that. So maybe that's my challenge to you. And if you're a woman and you're listening to me and you feel kind of like I felt, I don't know how I'm going to fit in. I don't know exactly where my skills match with ministry, and you feel a little bit on the outside. I just really encourage you that there's room for all of us at the table. And don't ever, ever, ever minimize your gifts, your God-given gifts and your God-given abilities for the comfort of somebody else just because somebody else feels uncomfortable. Don't do it. It's not worth it. I'm sure all of us can agree with that. Keep going, keep being you, keep doing you. And I think that God's going to honor that. He's going to open up doors for you, and they're not going to make sense to anybody else. I know that's been my own personal experience. They're not going to make sense. It won't make sense, but it'll make sense to you because that's who he's created you to be. So yeah, that's what I would say I'd want people to know.
Okay. I'd like to just add on to Rebecca, what you said, because I just wrote a couple of notes even before as I was thinking about this and the question that Brad had sent out. And the notes that I wrote just go exactly with what you had just said. And it was, if there's one thing I want women to know is to be proactive and to find where you fit and know who you are. That's it. We came into a time, my husband pastored for about 13 years and came into a place of ministry where very similar situations. And we were just chatting about it earlier, and he said, just bring up internship. And I know when we went on internship with a beautiful, beautiful couple, it was a fantastic experience. But the first thing, I guess, that we started to do was that my husband was the one that was going on all the visitation, and he told me that I would be doing the bulletin. So it was kind of like, okay, I'm doing the paperwork and my husband's doing the ministry. So instead of becoming, I guess, bitter about that or trying to argue about it, I found where I fit in ministry. And I found out that, okay, I love to lead worship. And that's what I do in my local church right now. I'm very heavily involved in worship and music and also volunteering as a youth leader. So not too feeling old now, but after we've been out of ministry for, I guess, 11 years now, full-time ministry. But again, it's those things of finding who you are and where you fit in that. And the pastor at that time that we did internship with had no ill intent. He was wonderful. It's just the way that it was. When 25 years ago, and that sounds like a lot of years. That was what it is a lot of years, Brad. But you're still older than we are. But that was what people did. And that's what people understood women to be, even if you worked outside the house, outside the church. I've always worked outside the church, and I've never been paid by the church to do anything in the church. And that was okay with me because I found where I fit. I fit more in community. I fit more in working with nonprofit organizations and doing more community-oriented things and in the school system. And I found that is not just about preaching the gospel. It's about being the gospel and living that ministry wherever you go and whatever you do. And it doesn't mean that it's not going to connect with the physical church and the church body, but it will connect, absolutely. But it's about being the calm in someone's storm, or it's about being the person that you talk to when somebody's grieving and you're holding on to them, or sometimes it's being the voice of reason. It's being where people are in their situations and their circumstances. And while that can be done through full-time ministry, I found that for me, where I fit is not in full-time ministry, but rather in community.
Good. Excellent. Thank you. Christy or Kayla?
Yeah, I think it's great what you ladies are sharing. I had notes here too, and some of the points that are coming through, like what I'd want you to know is women can be the hardest on women. So, again, just echoing that, a shout out to our ladies to just be so mindful and really take inventory and take heart on, you know, whoever the woman is, if it's the person next to you, if it's someone in leadership or somebody in a certain role, and just evaluating our hearts and our minds and where that's at. Because I wrote down here, and it's funny, I asked Jeff, what would you say? And this is one of the points that he said, first of all, is women can be the hardest on women. He said that too. And I think sometimes we can really do well to champion certain women or champion certain women in our circle, and then sometimes not as well beyond that. And so just looking beyond our circle and still using that same, you know, cheerleading mindset and attitude and empowering the woman in front of us. So yeah, I was there with that as well. I guess if I was just to take another little different angle, I'd say, you know, if you have women, even that you're hearing from tonight, who have ministry experience, maybe they've been trained in ministry, and they've also had cross training, they have other competencies and skills in another arena, in another place and space. Mine those women, their gold, and turn to them to listen and hear about their experience, their skills, what they can offer, what they are seeing in their little corner of the community, or the people that they are working with, be it the education system, the government, mental health, wherever that person is, and use them as adjunct ministry leaders or voices around a table. Allied, you know, in the family health team I'm at, we have allied health, right? That we're a big multidisciplinary team that come together to provide this expansive service for our community for health and wellness. We could think of it like that around our ministry tables. Let's draw in allied ministers and ministry people who have training and competencies in other areas, and it's only going to make us better and serve our community in a much more impactful way. And sometimes I think that's our heart's desire. We want to do that, but we can keep siloed, or we can keep kind of, you know, our blinders on a little bit. Expand the table, make the table longer. Rebecca's already said that. There's room, there's space. And so I guess that's something that I'd put forth a challenge or want you to consider, is looking for men or women in different spaces that can really be that ally and speak to things in a different creative way, or have a different perspective or lens. So that's one thing I thought. And I agree with the ladies too. You know, I can remember walking down I have this image in walking down my hallway in high school and saying these words, like I knew I was going into ministry, and I knew I was going into therapy world, both. I knew they were both going to happen. And just saying, you know, my paycheck, my calling's not attached to my paycheck, you know, and so don't just look for those with a stage, a microphone, or a paycheck as leaders in your community. Look beyond that.
Good.
That's good. I think I would just piggyback on that, on some of what Christy just said, in terms of sort of that box that we put, you know, what ministry looks like for women in, and the other ladies have referred to this as well. I love the whole multidisciplinary concept, and I just think that if we were to lean into that a little bit more as a church, we would just see churches thrive that much more. You know, the giftings that we often lean into are in one little area. They're in, you know, they're in music, and they're in public speaking, or even teaching, and it just seems like that's where the church often stops. And if we could just broaden our view of what ministry actually looks like, this is something that, you know, my thinking has really been challenged on. We're inside of a system that really paints women in ministry a certain way. We've all addressed it in our own ways. Like, we've all had experiences in that. And because of that pressure on women to be a certain thing, or for it to look a certain way, I don't have the stats on this, but from my experience, I see women transition from ministry, from what we would deem full-time ministry to not full-time ministry, far more than what we see women, because of these challenges that we face that are unique to women, even more so than men. And we can all look around us. We know of women. We are the women, actually, who did training in ministry, and then we moved away from it, and we either retrained and we got our feet wet in other avenues. And I think the main thing that I would tell people is that doesn't have to be a plan B. That's not I was in ministry and now I'm out of ministry. In fact, it's as we grow, we lean more and more into understanding and operating in who God has wired us to be. If I'm a true disciple of Christ, then I have to do that constantly. I have to lean in, nurture, and operate in those facets, what God has called me to be. That has never been more clear to me now than ever in my life. And I suspect it'll get more and more clear as time goes on, if I am a true disciple of Christ. So if that's happening, then the shifts in our seasons ought to also happen. And so the shifts don't have to be filled with shame. I was in ministry, I'm out of ministry. In fact, when we lean into those shifts, if they are leaning into who God has wired us to be, we can actually find fuller time ministry in those spaces than maybe we ever had before with proper titles, if that makes sense. And so if I could just speak to those out there listening who maybe have ministry training and you're either wondering about retraining, or you've moved in a different direction, or you're wondering what to do next because opportunities haven't been open to you, because whether you're male or female, maybe the opportunities just haven't been what you dreamed of. I think the main thing that I would want you to know is that the only thing you're responsible for is being who God called you to be in the opportunity that exists right in this very moment. It's so much, my calling has never, ever changed, but it has looked different in my career based on the opportunities in front of me. And I don't think that God tolerates me in certain positions. I think he honors it. And I am refusing to live shame-filled about leaving an organization, let's just call it or leaving a position, but really leaning into it intentionally and unapologetically. And that is okay. That is okay, my friends. In fact, I see people all the time, all around me, who are doing very much full-time ministry, more full-time ministry than I've seen some do in the pastorate. Let's be honest, we've all seen it. We've got pastors on staff who don't actually pastor, and their roles are not even intended to pastor, and yet we've got people in other roles who are pastoring and ministering all the time, and they are all valid. They're all very, very valid. So conventional and unconventional is an entire illusion. My eyes have been open to it. It's an illusion. It's an illusion, I promise you.
That's good, Kayla. I don't think God tolerates me in certain positions. He honors it. Yes. Amen. One of you want to bounce off something the others have said? Off you go.
I just want to say briefly, just to challenge who out there listening might need to be in bivocational type ministry and expand your influence and where your skills can be used in your community or your city. And I love how Kayla just started to just name shame and just trying to take shame out, because within our little subculture, how we see people and treat people when they transition away from the stage and the microphone, it can be a shaming type experience, and even for myself in my story, just really brief. I had a hard transition. It wasn't actually one I really wanted at the time, and then did end up using my skill sets more full time in psychotherapy and mental health. And I don't even think I told people at camp for the first year I was doing that, because they would there was comments like, oh, you're not a pastor anymore, you're not in ministry anymore. And I was still doing pulpit fill-ins. I was still doing other sorts of things as well. And it just, because like Kayla said, my calling hasn't changed, not one bit. And yeah, I didn't feel shame about myself. I just didn't want the external community of shame to address it. So yeah, I think that's really, really good. Just taking the shame out of it, and a challenge. Maybe there's somebody out there tonight that needs to consider bivocational, and be brave.
Just on something Kayla had said too, again, making a few jot notes. I had written down around sometimes when we're making efforts to strive for recognition or for a title in church ministry will often allow us to miss some teachable moments and some other ministry opportunities that come in and ministry moments. And again, that's not to take away from the title of pastor, or it's a process of finding out who you are. And maybe that's not meant to be your title, as Christy has just mentioned, or Kayla's mentioned. Maybe it's not. Maybe, maybe God has put you in these places for a specific reason, because he knows who we are. He created us in his image. He knows our ins and our outs. So maybe that's what you need to just take a step back and look at to see. Maybe this is not the opportunity I'm supposed to be moving forward to right now, or maybe it is. Just question and be true to who you are.
See a comment here from Taylor. The people who are in full-time ministry are really supposed to be equipping people to be in full-time ministry. We have really messed up the semantics, haven't we? That's good. Very good. Thanks for that, Taylor. Anything else? Any other thoughts to bounce off that? I'm just reading through the comments here. Here's a point from Dwight. We still have a fair distance to go when it comes to gender equality, especially in the church. What do you feel you need to do to move that needle further ahead? Who wants to take that?
I'll jump in there. Oh gosh, I've thought about this question so many times. I believe on your last panel, I think it was Taylor who said, women aren't striving, or most women aren't striving to be more elevated than men. It's not about that. But during this season of needing to move that needle a little bit, we do need to probably lean in a little bit more intentionally, because it doesn't come naturally. And there's so many unchecked biases that exist out there, that we need our male counterparts to be really checking, doing a double check, asking for others' opinions, before maybe just making assumptions. But I think that multidisciplinary thing is also could be a huge piece in moving this forward, because we have different giftings. We all have different giftings. And if we're to look around the table and create more space and create a longer table, let's invite those who have a variety of giftings. And I can guarantee you, women will show up. Women will be there in those various roles. They're waiting. And I would say to the women who are listening in who are maybe already in these other disciplines, we don't ask enough to be at the table. We've waited to be asked a lot, but it's okay to ask too. It's okay to come forward and say, hey, I would like a seat at the table. What's the worst that can happen? The very worst that can happen is that someone says no and we're still not at the table, but we're no further behind. In fact, it might even challenge someone to check their own bias next time. But ask for the raise, ask for a seat at the table, I remember when I was working at head office, and Dean would laugh at this, Dean Brenton, because I'd be down in my office when I was working there, and sometimes I would pop out, and he'd be having a conversation. If I knew it was something that I could poke my head into, I would poke it, and very in a funny sort of way, I would say, "Hey guys, anybody need my opinion on anything?" It was a funny way of inserting myself, and we all laugh at it because I used to do it. But I say that to say, ask for the seat. It's okay. Put yourself out there. If it gets turned down, so what? Ask again and again and again and again, and someone will give you a seat, because even if it's just to shut you up, someone will give you a seat, and that's okay. An opportunity is an opportunity, my friends.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with hustling. I agree with that, Kayla. I think God gave women the spiritual gift of the hustle just because he knew. he knew it might take us a little bit more effort to get the seat at the table. And I totally agree with that. To jump in to on the point of how to move the needle forward a little bit, I think it's also continue to have conversations like this one. And it's not about pushing an agenda. I think like Kayla kind of touched on that, right? It's not about, like pushing this agenda. It's about pushing us forward, right? Like we're trying to move forward, trying to get the needle to move forward. So hopefully in the future, like when my daughter grows up, we're not having these same conversations over and over again, right? So I think conversations like these are so important. Spaces like this are so important.
Yeah, I think somebody could correct me on this if I'm wrong. I think our recent stats are something like we have 34% women as credential holders. Again, we're going back to those who are holding credentials, and I think 5.6% of women are in lead roles. And so I think just naming that is really, really important to know where we're at and to know where we need to go and need to get to. And I'm all about the right woman or the right man, the equipped woman, the equipped man, whoever you are. But at the same time, there is a bit of a discrepancy there. So, I do think that we need to be intentional in how we're going to include women in leadership, all sorts of different kinds of leadership, a diversity of leadership roles, including lead roles, supportive roles. And we might need to really slow down and be intentional in our processes and in our system and how we hire and how we look and how we recruit. And then I say to women who want a different kind of voice or to gain a voice and to use their calling and giftings and skill set, to also just reach out to other women who perhaps have been there or are there, they're using their voice, reach out for some mentorship or some connection and reach out for a coffee or a call, a video call. We're so connected, easily connected these days in this way. And so find a woman who you can speak to and say, okay, what do I do? Bounce some ideas. How did you do it? And brainstorm together, get support and some mentorship.
Good. We have some other ladies who have been listening in. I'm going to invite them to the screen now as well. There you are. Let's see. We have Crystal, who is pastoring with her husband in Bishop's Falls, Newfoundland. We have Hannah. Tell me where you are right now, Hannah. Hannah's often commented. You'll have seen Hannah's questions and comments through all of my live streams in the past.
So I'm in Toronto, Ontario, and I'm a youth pastor at a church actually not far away from Tyndale. It's like a 5-minute drive, Emmanuel Baptist Church, and I've been there for 5 years now. So, yeah.
Awesome. And Nellie, where are you pastoring?
So I'm in Windsor, Ontario. I'm a Mission Canada worker, so a Canadian missionary to Canada, and specifically on the University of Windsor campus.
Awesome. And I had you in class, right?
Yes.
And I had Hannah in class, I believe. I don't think I had you in class, did I, Crystal?
Maybe an online class?
Yeah, maybe. But now we're gone back many moons.
Shh.
And I'm really glad to have Pam with us. Pam, tell us what you have a new position, I do believe.
Yeah, well, I'm with the Salvation Army currently, but my history is Pentecostal Church of Newfoundland, and spent the first 20 years of my life in the Pentecostal Church. I'm now Salvation Army officer for 20 years, pastoring with my husband in Kitchener, Ontario, but as of July, I will move into a part-time role and additional responsibility with the territory as the gender advocate for gender equity for the Salvation Army in Canada.
So the Salvation Army has hired an advocate for gender equality, and that's really cool, and we are glad to have you with us. So the four that have just joined, you've listened to the four who've been chatting. Any thoughts that you'd like to share with us right off the bat? It's a free-for-all now. I couldn't even pretend to moderate the lot of you, so just let her go.
If I could just jump in to say that there's been so many rich things that are coming out of the conversation. I appreciate the women who've shared. And I just want to echo that whole idea around, the kingdom is a place of plenty. This table is large enough for us all. There's no scarcity in the kingdom. That's just a lie of the enemy. And we need to be, just making that table larger, and making space, and just saying, like, come, there's room for everyone. And it's the onus is on the people who've been at the table the whole time, people with privilege, our male counterparts, to not feel this as a loss or a threat in any way. It's just that there's room for all of our gifts. God has gifted us, called us, empowered by his Holy Spirit, and the kingdom will be richer for us all to be there.
Good.
Yeah, exactly. I think Taylor in the comments had said something about when you're at the table, pull up a seat for someone else. And I was like, yes, that's it. Like, for those who are there, who already are represented, like, bring someone along with you, because mentorship is like a big thing for me. I've asked people to be my mentor and been turned down before. Men who are like, no, I have to follow the Billy Graham rule. So, like, can't mentor you. And so if you're there, bring someone along with you, because if we don't, then we're not really going to have a church, and we're not really going to have leaders in the next couple of years. So yes on that.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with encouraging one another as well, and kind of supporting each other through ministry. And I think sometimes churches and ministries compare each other and kind of are like, don't work together well. And I tend to be the only female youth pastor in a room when I meet up with other male youth pastors and stuff. And so when you find someone else who's a female, who's in the ministry that you're in, and you're like, oh, it's mostly male dominant, it's encouraging to see, and you kind of gravitate them to them naturally. And but I think what has helped me as well has been people who have seen giftings within me and called them out, even in ways that I would never have guessed. When I first got hired at Emmanuel, they asked if I would consider getting ordained. And at the time, I was like, that was something that never crossed my mind ever, because I was like, I want to be a youth pastor. That's all I want to do, and stuff. And because of that and the encouragement, I am going through that process now and almost done. And but it has been a journey with other women in ministry and our male coworkers as well, supporting in different ways. So it's great to see other women who are involved in ministry. Yeah.
Crystal, what's on your mind?
I mean, there's so much that I could say about so many things, but I think the biggest thing that I have seen throughout, especially these later years of ministry with my husband as a senior pastor and being on staff alongside of him that way, has been to be real and authentic. And believe it or not, that's a quality that a lot of our congregations haven't seen. And I've been told over and over that it's new and it takes some getting used to. When we're willing to be vulnerable and real and allow our congregation to see us as we go through things, and to not just be what's expected of us or to play the role, we'll say. And so that's something that I've tried very hard to do and to be. I don't know if that makes any sense, maybe to some people, and maybe to some people it doesn't, but and I don't mean any offense to anyone by that either. But my husband, I used to find, would preface us by saying, now she's not going to be your typical pastor's wife. And nor am I, but I don't know if I'm a typical anything. So I don't know how that goes down.
I kind of feel that's accurate. Yep.
But I mean, being real and honest, I find gains you credit with people. And once you've gained the credit, you can impact and you can pour in and you can help change lives and situations. So
Okay, folks, off you go.
Yeah, I think what you said, Crystal, sorry, just really emphasizes that being authentically you is what you are called to be, and like bring all of that to your role and to your calling. When I first like moved out here to Windsor, of course, I'm like by myself, single, young adult pastor, in a church context that I'm not like completely familiar with. I like toughened myself up for some reason, and would not cry, would just like, you know, like hide the empathy part of me. But I know that is like such a big part of me. And now my church knows that like on any given Sunday, I'm probably going to cry and someone's going to walk up with a box of tissues, or they'll have it on the pulpit ready for me. And they're not afraid of it as I thought. And something that was really affirmative for me in that is being on calls with Pastor David Wells, who's like general superintendent of the PAOC. And on any given call, similarly, he could be in tears, voice quivering, lips quivering, like ready to cry, if not actually crying. And I was like, you know what? If my boss with a capital B can do that, then what am I afraid of? And so there will be people that will mirror those things within you, future leader who's listening now, that like just shows you and affirms that you can be completely you yourself in your role.
Yeah, I think we're always going to come up against stereotypes and expectations, labels, in all of our different spaces. And I think you're right. It's about the courage of just being yourself, and also having the patience and grace to educate those around you to say, this is who I am, and this is not who I am, and this is what I do, and this is not what I do. These are my gifts, and I'm going to walk in them. And you know, it does wear on you after years and years and years of kind of pushing back from those kinds of expectations. But there's reward in knowing that, you know, it's God who's given us these gifts and these callings, and I, you know, I live for the voice and the audience of one, and yeah.
And it's being, like I said earlier, and we've all been alluding to, being authentic in who you are in the situation. And if I can encourage anybody that's out there that's listening, find those people that are around you that will invest in you and will mentor you, and don't live for the people that aren't going to do that. There's so many willing people, and you don't need a lot. You need a few really invested people in your life, and they are there. And I just want to give a shout out today, because I saw on Facebook a little bit ago before this call that Erlene just got hired on as church ministries at the worship center in St. John's, and she's a phenomenal person. So shout out to you, Erlene Feltham, tonight. But again, all of you ladies are just such great wisdom coming from you tonight, and I hope whoever's listening will just know that to be true to who you are, and you will find your place. God has your place set for you.
I just wanted to share a little of my journey starting out. So I wasn't raised in a Pentecostal church until I was about 13 years old. And that's a whole miracle story where I just felt I heard the voice of the Lord tell me, go to down the hill to the church on the hill, to the Pentecostal church. And I was raised in the United Church of Canada. And so in my modeling growing up, in my template that was being shown to me is I saw female ministers in those pulpits. I had a family who my mom had different leadership roles. My dad had different leadership roles, and really didn't pick up on this notion that I couldn't do something because I was a female. And I didn't pick up on the notion at all. I didn't know that in certain places and spaces, maybe there was a little bit of a restriction or a challenge for females to be in a ministry role. So here I get the call, very passionate, pursue Bible college. And it probably wasn't even still clicking in for me at Bible college, really, until, you know, you bumped into certain things as you journeyed forward. And I guess I say that to say, wouldn't it be wonderful for our girls, our young girls, and I think this is happening more and more, to have that experience where they didn't know that they couldn't, that they really knew they could. And they really knew that they could be empowered and they wouldn't be restricted, and that they would have the space and the place for their calling, and they could use that passion and not run into those bumps, and they can have a little more freedom and a little more of a runway that we can pave for them.
I just want to say that I think expectations have hindered women in ministry, but I also think it's our own mentality or the way that we view ourselves as well. A lot of the times, I think I had limited myself in ways that I didn't even realize until other people gave me opportunities. I can remember the first time I was asked to do communion, and I was like, don't I need to be ordained to do that? Like, or like an associate pastor or whatever. And it was just the things that I picked up on as a kid growing up in the church that weren't verbalized, but you pick up on them subconsciously. Like, that I didn't fit the typical youth pastor, that I'm not a guy that plays guitar and can sing and all this stuff, like that typical stereotype to some extent. But yeah, I think my own perspective and my own mentality on certain things, I limited myself more than other people to some extent, just because I had to kind of change my perspective. I grew up in Portugal as a missionary kid, and youth ministry, one, doesn't really exist there. It's not a thing. It's not really a position, but also women in ministry, other than working with children, I never really saw that. So I think when you don't see that, you limit yourself to some extent. So it's great to see other women who are in different ministries outside of just children's or youth or and that kind of, or women's Bible studies, as mentioned before, and stuff. That breaking the mold, I think, helps the next generation to be able to break their mold, whatever that might be.
You know, it's interesting because I hear everybody say the same thing, whether it's in this conversation or other conversations. Everybody always says, I don't fit the mold. I don't fit the mold. I've never met a woman who says, you know what, I fit the mold. I've never, ever heard that comment. And I wonder, like, where did this come from? Where did this idea that that it had to look a certain way, where did it come from? How did it get to the point where we automatically adopted it? And I know that there's some external expectations, but I think Hannah's right. I think there's some, expectations that we put on ourselves, and then we automatically get defensive. Like, we've got to explain why we don't do that, why I am the way I am. When I started in ministry, I was trying to think of how many years, and I can't do the math right now. When I started in ministry many moons ago, I found myself on this bit of a soapbox trying to explain, because I was like Christy, I grew up not in a Christian home, and I had no idea that there would be challenges. None. No idea. Just thought that I could literally do whatever I wanted to do in the world. And my parents made me believe that. And I went into ministry thinking that that's exactly what I would do. I would do whatever I wanted to do. And I was in for the shock of my life, which propelled me toward this soapbox really early in ministry. And I felt myself adopt this soapbox where I felt like I had to tell the world that women can do everything that men can do, and please give us opportunities. And it got to this point where I realized nobody was listening. Nobody really hears people who are on a soapbox. And I was so fearful of letting that soapbox go, like frightened clean to death, thought that I was giving up on something if I stepped off my soapbox. And it was only when I felt like I figuratively stepped away from that and just started living the way that I felt that God was calling me to live and be and minister. It was only when that happened did opportunities come. And opportunities came then. And even apart from the opportunities, I suddenly felt more free. And I have never looked back. Now, that's not to say that there won't be opportunities to speak up and address issues very upfront, in a very bold way. But that's very different than living on the soapbox. And that kind of expectation that we've got to right all the wrongs, that we've got to say all the things to make everyone believe, it just doesn't work that way. I think that it's just going to have to be a lot of women leaning in to what it is that they've been called to do and living it out. Speak yes when there's an opportunity in the right audience, where it's going to make a difference. But other than that, we've just got to live it.
That's good, Kayla. It's kind of been my approach is just watch my life and see the fruit. Just watch my life and just see the disciples that are made, or their life in the Spirit. And you know what? So, I mean, I've, as you all probably do too, I have many humorous and unfortunate stories. I remember this one day I was getting ready to teach a Bible study and lead intercessory prayer. And there was a man and a woman in the back row. There was maybe about 20 people there. It was a Thursday morning. Man and a woman in the back row, vocally, very loudly debating if I was allowed to teach this morning. One, the man was arguing because I was a woman, he didn't think I could teach, and quoting off all sorts of things. And she was debating and arguing because I did not have children, I could not teach. And so I just let them go. And at the end, I just said, all right, you guys ready to pray? And just kept going. But my point I make about that is about living it is any people who I've come into those sorts of situations with, and this is kind of funny because it was very public, but those are the people who would watch my life. And you know what? If they had a difficult situation in their life, if they needed healing or prayer, they would come and seek me, right? Let them, and I agree, be a voice, but let them watch your life and just walk in it. Just do it and be you, and get those shoes on and walk in them.
And watch the mess ups too, because anybody who's watched me has not only saw the fruit in my life, but they've seen a whole pile of, feet in my mouth or a lot of mess ups and stuff too. So you can see my mess ups because, this is who I am, good and bad. But the people that then come not only come because they see your giftings, because they see you as relatable. And when they mess up, they're like, hey, I think she might have been down this road before. And yes, I have. Let's talk. And so all of that is really important. And I think that goes back to Crystal's comment about just being real. This is what I have. It's really wildly imperfect. But I'm figuring it out. I'm doing the best I can. And if we can walk this road together, then that'd be great.
And I agree. I've heard other women pastors and preachers say, why all you guys are over here arguing about it? I'm just going to be about the Father's business. I'm just going to preach the gospel. I'm just going to do my thing. I guess for me, in an equity, an advocacy role, and also an educator, I also think there is a huge space that we need to make for educating our congregations and our people, because there are some strong voices in the evangelical church in the United States and in Canada that hold to certain views of scripture and theology that are not actually our theology and our tradition and our doctrine, but they're seeping into the pews because they have such a large platform. They're famous writers, famous pastors, and our people don't really know which tradition they are planted in, and they're listening to all of these other views about women in leadership. And so part of what we're going to do in our task force in the Salvation Army is to educate our congregations to say, this is where we line up in our tradition. And really excited about being a part of that as well.
To your point, Kayla, about it was a rhetorical question, but why is there a mold? Because the representation isn't there. Because people look and they're like, oh, well, this is what a leader looks like, a man at this age with this kind of success in his life, or what is deemed as success. And that's why we say representation matters. Because if people aren't being able to see people in roles, women in these kinds of leadership roles, then they're going to be like, oh, well, then I guess I don't fit the mold, because the mold looks like something that I am not.
That's why we were all so excited when the first African American vice president got elected this year, right? Like, I mean, social media blew up because we are finally seeing somebody that, you know, looked different, looked like other people in that role. So it's important. I agree. Nellie, I agree.
Absolutely. I remember growing up in the Pentecost church in the 80s. And I mean, I think there was only one married woman preacher I can remember, Pastor Grace Faders. And she was highly influential in my life as a pastor. I saw her and listened to her preach more than her husband preached. And that had a profound impact on me growing up. But she's about the only one that I can recall. And representation absolutely matters. And I'm so proud to be able to say that I've preached so often in our congregations that I've had a 6-year-old little girl who was playing make-believe in her own living room and with her Bible open, and her mom say, you know, what are you doing? And she said, I'm playing Captain Pam. And so when she told me that, I almost cried, because it was so important for us then to walk in those spaces and to show up, and for little girls to see, you know, that there is space here for them to walk in their callings.
And it's really interesting, and this came up on the panel prior, Brad, when you had it about our history of Pentecostalism in Newfoundland, and my grandmother being one of those pastors who came after Sister Garrigus, who came and preached. And I know when she was married, when Nan and Pop were in assemblies and the Bethesda Mission and a number of other churches, like, she was the preacher. She was the one that the congregation wanted to hear. She was the fiery crackerjack going across the platforms. And we've shifted so far from where we were to this point where we've got to argue for it or fight for something that we should not have to be doing. And it's amazing to me how we got there. And just to add to Kayla's point about owning your mess ups, as we all have, I think too, we're in a place as women in leadership that we are pushing for more women, for equity. We are doing that. But we also have to own our mistakes and realize that people are watching us and watching how we deal with them. And that's tricky sometimes, because not that it's right, not that they are looking at us more than they are at a male, but it seems to be that way. So I would just put that caution out there to women in ministry, women in leadership. Be strong. Again, know who you are, own your mistakes, deal with them wisely with the instruction of the Lord, and just go for it. Be like Nan Snow, you know, be the firecracker going across the platform or wherever you are, not just in a church, but wherever you are in society. Be the person who's living ministry. That's what our calling is to live ministry.
Someone had just put up a comment there about let's have women preach in the pulpit more than just Mother's Day. And I recently kind of blew up a little thread actually amongst our the pastors on our site that discussed these things, and had just said just that, and that to not think that just putting a woman in the pulpit on Mother's Day is our egalitarian efforts for the year, because it's not. And that blew up a little bit, to be honest. But I wanted it to, because I think we have to have those really sober, reflective moments when we think we're doing good, that maybe, or we're doing enough, that maybe we're not. And we have to really, really, really look at that.
I think it's a partnership between male pastors and female pastors, right? And how there's wisdom and things that we can learn from both voices. And if we don't have the female voice or the male voice, then we miss out on something, or the female or male perspective of scripture, or what we are reading and understanding of God. And so I think it's important for that partnership, and definitely advocating for women and encouraging them and that kind of stuff, but also working alongside our male coworkers and trying to encourage them to open up a bit more if they need to, or and just kind of work together in ways that might not be common in the big C church, in every single church, because there's different ministry contexts and difficulties and different things like that and challenges. But definitely having those supporters who are there for you in the good times and the hard times is definitely important. And I think, especially working in ministry, we face a lot of difficulties spiritually, but also within our context at churches and stuff, right? Conflict and different things that come up because that we're female or male or whatever our perspectives are. So, yeah.
And I mean, I'm going to be very transparent. I find the scrutiny to be a little bit intense in terms of my sense has always been that in order to be respected as a leader for women, it seems like they need to be far more superior. There was a study done in 2011 that said that men are more promoted based on their potential, whereas women are promoted mostly on past performance. So it's almost like you're under this scrutiny to succeed, to be exceptional. So I'm going to acknowledge before all of you and all of you strong women that, owning mistakes and things like that I'm still in that process. I'm still trying to find that safe space that I can do that, because I don't know, there's just a sense that we don't have that same amount of championing happening for women. If you're mediocre, if you're struggling in the position, if you're not able to cut it, I think the pressure that's how I feel. The pressure seems to be amped up for us as women to prove ourselves in those spaces.
Yeah, which makes the vulnerability, which is my Achilles heel, extremely difficult, because, showing any kind of weakness or what would be a perceived weakness just feels like it'll be forever held against me. It'll be the reason why I don't, get, an opportunity next time or something like that. And every time I am vulnerable, I deal with this vulnerability hangover for 2 to 3 days afterwards, where I'm regretting what I said or how I said it. Like, how dare I, I feel brave in the moment, and then I have severe regret afterwards. It's hard. It's quite the journey. It's very, very, very hard. Actually, one of the most challenging reads I ever read was Brene Brown's Dare to Lead. And I read it because I loved the title, and it sounded like, leadership. And she talked all about vulnerability, and I hated it. I loved the book. It was so good, but it was by far the most challenging read I have ever engaged in, because of that very piece. It feels unsafe to be vulnerable, and I've been in many, many of those situations before.
Absolutely.
I think it is important to name that, because I think maybe that's where some coaching for some wisdom can come in, and how to be vulnerable and knowing our environment. I think there needs to be some wisdom in that approach. Is, Pam and Kayla, I'm with you there. In some of the things I wrote down, when Brad was saying, what would you want people to know? So I have this line, what women often feel like they have to answer continually for their legitimacy in overt and covert ways. And so some of it's obvious and some of it's really underneath the surface, riding underneath the surface. And just speaking with women over the years, this is another thing I wrote down, that women really hope they're at the table because of who they are, their calling and skills, and they're not the token woman at the table. They're not because of tokenism. And so those were the couple things that's what you guys are sharing as well here. And when I asked my husband, Jeff, hey, what would you say, just having watched this all unfold in our lives for a couple decades? And he said a bunch of great things, actually. But he said, you know what, back to that word hustle, Rebecca. He said, you know what, I've watched you in particular as my wife, but women put in the double. I've watched them take on more roles that's outside of their portfolio to try to maintain their worth or legitimacy in that role. And, from my perspective, I can say that was never really a mind heart thing that I was deliberately ever trying to do. I like taking on stuff, but but it's probably riding underneath the surface because of the subculture we're in, and it's there, it influences us. And so that's what he said, women have to work harder to maintain legitimacy.
I think to what you said, Christy and Pam earlier too, it's so true that women do take on, and I'm guilty of that too. We take on more and more and more, and perhaps if we took on more of where our strengths lay and didn't take on things that where our strengths don't lie, then we wouldn't have that need to feel like we have to answer for our mess ups as much, or because we're living in our strengths, not in our weaknesses. And God is right there in our weaknesses. That's not what I mean, not to do that. But if we're trying to be everything to everyone, then we're not living in our strengths.
I think sorry.
No, it's fine. I'm watching Crystal down there with her mic going on and off.
No, there were several times I was going to say something, but then someone else comments, and then it changes, and then it's like, okay, I won't say that now, and then it changes. But I have to, not because he has said anything, because he's not said a word, but I have to give credit to my husband, who is our senior pastor at our church, and he, all through the 3.5 years that we have been here, have regularly scheduled myself and the other female pastor here on staff for preaching. It has never been a thing with the men have to preach more, or that the women are not allowed to preach. We've taken our regularly scheduled turns here. And maybe, and don't kill me, don't attack me, but maybe is it possible here in Newfoundland, because I know some of you ladies aren't from here, but is it possible that some of the roles aren't filled by women in Newfoundland because there's so little roles to be filled? In that, so for example, Kayla, like in the roles when you and Matthew were here on the island, it was often Matthew who took the paid position and you were his wife. I'll say it that way, for lack of a better way to say it. And same with you, Rebecca. So Stephen is your husband's name's Stephen, right? he's in the paid role and you're his wife, right? And same with you, Kirsty. But Dave would be in a paid role and you would be his wife, because there was only one position to fill. And it seems like, I should say, I guess, because it's still happening, it's usually the guy who fills the role and the wife finds something else to do. Which, by the way, if you are not yet married and plan to get married, my goodness, you've got yourself a whole new self-revelation to come once you get married and have to try and find your place again in that married position when your husband's the one who's in a full-time position and you're his wife. That's a whole nother finding yourself experience, believe me. But so I'm wondering, looking at the few positions, because here in Newfoundland, there are so few staff positions, really, when you look at how many churches actually have staff pastors. And if they're being filled by couples, which because, you know the old saying, you get, what is it? You get, 2 for the price of 1, right?
2 for 1, yeah.
Yeah, so if they're being filled by couples and they're giving the position to him, whether it's your decision as a couple that he's going to take the paid position and you'll be his partner in ministry or what have you, then where are the women supposed to fit in when there's so few positions to be had? You hear what I'm saying? So is it that is it that we're not equal, or is it that we're not seen as equals? Or is it that we've chosen sort of to be the partner instead of the paid position? I'll say it that way.
I think the challenge, Crystal, has been that 9 times out of 10, if there's one position and there's a couple who are both trained in credentials, the position is offered to the male.
Yes.
Easily 9 times out of 10. And that goes across the country too.
Yeah.
That's part of our challenge. And it's part of a challenge for young women who are training for ministry.
And
if they marry somebody else who's credentialed.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like when I married Greg, I had already pastored in Ontario, and I had a pastorate position other places as well. When I married him, I moved into a little old town where I left a job that was fairly high paying to be married to him in a low paying position where I was clearing more on EI than he was making in his position. And I wasn't really welcome, can I say that? In my giftings. I could come alongside him in his ministry role and play that as a youth pastor's wife and like do them. I did a lot of great discipleship work with the youth, the female youth in the group. We had some really great heart-to-hearts and some really gritty growth there. But in regards to some of my own giftings and who I wasn't welcome. And so I would stay home every day, unemployed, and I had no idea who I was, Kirsty, or where I fit in. I had no idea anymore, even though I knew who I was and I knew my giftings and I knew my callings. I had no idea where or how I could now fit into this new place, new life, really, that I found myself in. And was that because I didn't take a position? And even since then, I mean, we've often, Greg and I are a team. That's who we are. And I'm sure that goes for each of you married ladies as well. And we've not come up with the opportunity at this point where we've said either it has to be me or it has to be him. I know that he would support me if it was ever something that was my dream and we felt that it was a position for me and not for him. He would support me in that.
I think that's the importance, Crystal, of these conversations right now, and to engage women and young women in ministry for that, if they want to go into full-time ministry or into ministry outside of the church, as many of us on line tonight are. But it's having those conversations of not having to wait 25 years down the road to know who you are and where your giftings are, and not have to feel like you're boxed in, as somebody has said earlier, into a church. And I had the same thing when you went in and, oh, you're going to help with women's ministry. No, boy, I don't have, that's not who I am. I'll help with a lot of things, but that's not where I am right now. And it's just not my gifting. And I think that we need to empower those women that are coming out to say, you have to figure out who you are. So build people around you. Build those people around you that are going to help you find that out, and don't feel that you have to do something that is not going to, that you're not going to be, strong in. Now, there's always times, in my own work, and many of you will say, there's things in our jobs that we have to do and we are not strong in them, and we will grow in them. And in ministry, you will have many opportunities where you will grow, that you will be stretched tremendously and be just so much better off for it. But again, starting those conversations early, because Crystal, like, you should have had so many people coming around you, supporting you in that church and saying, what do you want to do? What kind of ministry do you want to see yourself in? And I don't want to monopolize too much time, but I remember when my husband left ministry and we moved to Grand Falls, I felt a little bit at a loss for a while. Even though I wasn't hired on at the church, I knew where I sat in ministry in the previous churches that we were in. And I didn't know where I was going to find my place in this new church. And I waited a few months, and sometimes I would sit in the pew during the service and saying, oh my goodness, like I need to be leading worship. I need to be doing this, and that. But God just wanted me to have those moments, those months of resting in him and trying to figure out what I wanted to do, how much of my life I wanted to give, how much I wanted to volunteer with 3 babies. And we found different opportunities. We started a group called Jammers and Jesus, where we had kids come in the evening in their pajamas, because the parents wanted to be able to come to church, and the kids needed to just be engaged so the parents could enjoy church. And they came in their pajamas, and we did wonderful teaching and wonderful nutritious snacks, and they were ready for bed when they left the church. And that was a huge opportunity for us, and loved it thoroughly. But again, it was finding those moments, letting God speak to you, speak to your heart, and then acting on it, not just doing something for the sake of doing it.
I think sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Kayla.
You know, young women have asked me, you know, many times when they're getting ready to get married, you know, what advice would you give? How many times have I met with young women in that scenario? I'm just thinking about that, Crystal. And, you know, my heart would ache because I sort of knew what was on the other side. In a lot of ways, you know, I saw other women who got married later than me find it easier to find a position than what I did, because I was married early and we started ministry together and the opportunities came to Matthew. And so I totally get all that. And if I were, you know, even then I would tell young women, but even more so now, I would tell them, find your lane. Sort of like what Kirsty is saying. Like, if you can find your lane, figure out what it is, how God's wired you, what it is that you have to offer, and go hard in that lane. Like, going back to what Rebecca said early, like, hustle. Yeah, good things come to those who wait, but in this area, good things also come to those who hustle. And I would say, find your lane and go hard in that. And you can create things, whether that, you know, heading in another discipline so that you can be in that lane, or whether that's being entrepreneurial or whatever it is. I really feel that this multidisciplinary piece is a huge part of moving the needle. And because, and if we're speaking, you know, a Newfoundland context, because that's where a lot of these listeners are, I know, even though they come from everywhere. If we're looking at the Newfoundland audience and our churches there, yeah, there's a lack of, you know, large churches with multi-staff situations, so the opportunities aren't as plentiful. But this exists everywhere. This exists, you know, in the school systems. It exists everywhere. It's not a problem that is only inside the church. Just recently, I finished my master's. And so when you finish your master's in education, people are automatically like, when are you heading into like a principal position? And so that conversation comes really naturally. Whether you're male or female, it comes really naturally. But if you're female, it comes with a caveat. You should wait until you finish raising your family until you become a principal. Now, nobody tells men that. Nobody tells men that they should finish raising their families before they move into a leadership position. So I think people assume, like, when it comes to the opportunities or a lack of opportunities, people feel like women have this other set of roles. So the only way that we combat that is to lean into who we are and create the lane, forge the path, be all there, you know, so that your giftings are flourishing, you're nurturing that area. And so you can create a multidisciplinary thing, even with your own partner. You know, you can create those avenues where you separate. Now, I know some people are called to, you know, support their husbands or their wives in those roles. But if you're looking for a role, one of the best things that you can ever do for yourself, if you're looking for an opportunity, is to create a lane and drive forward.
I find Crystal's story so sad. It's just heartbreaking. And I've just come through a time of reading a pile of interviews that were done in the Salvation Army amongst women officers and pastors. And I was wrecked by it. Like it was so heavy that I had to just stop and walk away. This was only this week. And my heart was just so wrenched by it. And because it comes down to, you know, just women feeling worthy and valued and not invisible. Like, you know, it's just about, and then that opens up a whole other conversation. And the Lord has been really using this issue to open my eyes to other issues of inequity, not just gender-based, but, you know, racially or whatever. That, you know, we need to be leaning in and listening to those who are on the margins, those who struggle with, you know, not being included, not being seen. And we just all want to be heard. We want to be seen. We want, you know, we want to have space. And it was only recently when I was studying Luke chapter 7, and the words of Jesus just popped right off the page when he was in the home of Simon the Pharisee. And he says to Simon, "Do you see this woman? Do you see her? do you see this woman? And honestly, I fell in love with Jesus all over again in that moment, because like those words need to echo in all of these spaces we're talking about. Do you see her? Do you see this woman? We just want to be seen. We want to be valued. We want to be heard. All of the other people groups who feel not seen, who feel invisible, like all of us with any privilege at all need to be leaning in and listening and making space and showing up in those spaces for sure.
When I hear what Crystal shared again, just going back to that, Crystal, is I think I'd be amiss if I didn't comment on mental health. You know, certainly having journeyed with many women and men as well, but many women sharing their stories of feeling misplaced, not sure where they fit, enduring misuse of power or spiritual abuse. And so when we have these moments where we've trained, we've had a call and show up at a place and we feel displaced or disoriented, that has a big impact on mental health. And maybe it would be different for everybody, but I'm just naming it in general, right? That does have an impact on mental health or marital health. It does. It has an impact on us because it's not quite what we planned or saw or felt or heard. And I think to name mental health as a part of this, what women endure and the journey to get there or be there or not be there, it's significant. And so, yeah, just hearing many, many stories. I wrote out my own, not even impact statement, my own chronological story, actually, more recently. And it's about 36 pages, just chronological stuff of the journey. And so, and I've heard just so many other people's stories. So, yeah, I just wanted to name mental health. And if there's a woman out there, like right now, listening to this tonight, and it's impacted your wellness or your mental health or your identity or sense of worth, or you're living in some kind of shame or disorientation, please reach out for support. And take care of you. It's important.
That's excellent conversation, folks. We're pushing 11:30 here in Newfoundland. If you're on Newfoundland time, and I know some of you have to be up in the morning. If you're on Alberta time, you're probably doing a little better, or Ontario. Anyone with a last word you would like to share before we sign off?
I think I would add one thing to maybe the men who are listening. Pam mentioned about using your privilege to listen and elevate the voices of others, and I think that that's really important. There has to be a distinction, though. I've seen some men do this really, really well, and the men who do it really well use their privilege to take opportunities to get out of the way or pull up an extra seat. The men who are still struggling to figure out how to do it well sometimes lean in and look for a pat on the back because they're making space for women, or it's like they want to be the hero who gave a woman an opportunity. And that doesn't feel very good when a man is looking for accolades for making space. What we really need you to do is use your privilege and your power and your voice to get out of the way sometimes, or to just pull up an extra space. And I say that with the utmost respect, because I just genuinely feel that some people don't know how to do it well. I know a lot of men who are already doing it well. So I would just put that out there very, very gently, because we're grateful to those who are trying in any way. But if I could just kind of nudge that little piece, that's what I would leave us with.
That's really good. I'll leave the last word here to Eileen, who says you are all plowing the ground for future generations of young women. I feel encouraged with regard to my own nieces coming up in the church. You ladies are incredible role models. Thanks so much for your transparency in sharing your thoughts tonight. And I would echo that. Thank you to Rebecca and Kirsty and Nellie and Christy and Kayla and Pam and Hannah and Crystal. Really appreciate you coming on. I really do. And I pray the Lord's blessing on you as you continue to do your own thing and your different ministries in all kinds of ways.
And thank you, Brad. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're most welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks,
Oh, you're
guys.
welcome. Continue to, just by doing what you're doing, you make a difference because you're visible and you're a role model for the young girls who are watching you, right? And there are young girls watching you all the time who now realize they can do what maybe they would not have realized otherwise because they see you doing it.
Yeah.
So be encouraged. There's a way to go, but we're getting there.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Great to share this space with you all. Bless you.
Bye. It was nice meeting you all.
There we go, folks. Thanks for sticking around, and I hope you have a really good week. I really appreciate the panel and them coming on. Great conversation again tonight. I trust you found that encouraging. So the Lord bless you. Have a great week, and we will see you again, God willing, next week.